What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls commentary. Alright guys, this time around we're going to have an interesting topic of discussion, right? And hopefully it'll be one of those commentaries that is indeed thought-provoking. Now, some of it will have something to do with life lessons, right? But, I mean, it will be tied into Dark Souls PvP. So let's go ahead and get right on into it. Now, one thing that you guys may not know about the Brigade is that I love the HBO television series called The Wire. Right, for some of you guys that are not familiar with The Wire, it was a series that unfortunately ended after 5 seasons. And it was out a few years ago. Right? And the thing about The Wire, there's this character out there, for those of you who are familiar, named Marlo Stanfield. Right? He was one of the biggest gangsters out there. And the particular scene that kind of caught my attention is, and actually I'll kind of, if I can find the clip on YouTube, I'll actually put it in the description box for you guys to see for yourself. Because the lesson that I want to talk about in this particular commentary is choosing between principles and survivability. Right? Thus the title of the commentary. Principles versus survivability. Now, with regard to the particular clip that I'm talking about, there's a scene where Marlo, he's kind of gambling at the table, playing a card game, and he ends up losing a lot of money. And once he loses, he just picks up and leaves, and he stops at the store before his ride comes to pick him up. Now, there's a security guard there. And, when he notices that the security guard is paying him extra attention, he goes to the counter and he steals 2 suckers. Now, at the time that he's stealing the 2 suckers, the security guard has to decide between principle and survivability. Now, what exactly do I mean? This is what I mean. The principle is he's a security guard. Right, and he's supposed to stop thieves and, ruckus and whatnot, fights, all that other nonsense that may happen in the store. That's his job, right, to secure the premises for the owner, right, and in turn he earns a check. But with regard to survivability, he has an idea, who Marlo is. He knows he's a, street guy. And knowing that he's a street guy, he probably knows that this guy cares little to nothing about life. Right? But in this particular instance, he chooses principle over survivability. Okay, so what happens is, after Marlo steals the suckers, he leaves the store, and the security guard actually goes after him, and he talks to him. Try to be man to man. He said, look, dude, come on now. I'm a working guy. I'm not a street dude. Come on. I'm just trying to do my job. Now, you're just going to sit up here and just try to steal it in my face like I'm not even here. Right? But a street dude like good old Marlo, he doesn't care about these type of principles. Right? He is a street dude. He didn't care anything about what the security guard was talking about. He didn't care about his family. He didn't care about the guy just trying to do his job. He didn't care about any of that. Unfortunately, Marlo has the guy killed. And this was one of those hard decisions where a lot of people have to make, trying to weigh what's more important between principles versus survivability. Now, here's another couple of examples. You have cops, right, who talk all this nonsense about the no snitching code that some ridiculous street people have, right? And now, one thing about the no snitch code, in my personal opinion, the cops, the politicians, all of them are hypocrites for talking against it. Now, I'm not saying that because I support no snitching, right? Because snitching is necessary, in my personal opinion. Actually, let me kind of get this right. I have a different definition of snitching than what a lot of these young dudes have. From what I hear, a lot of these guys, the definition that they hold for snitching is, okay, let's say, for example, we live in the neighborhood, right? And I have my family, right? My wife and kids. And there is a known rapist who lives right next door to me. Some people believe that if you were to call the police and say, hey dude, there's a rapist right next door to me, that's a snitch. Right? I wouldn't consider that a snitch. I would consider that a smart guy. Because at the end of the day, you may sit there with your little code of not snitching, but I can almost guarantee that either you or someone close to you within that neighborhood will become a victim eventually. The brigade's definition of snitching has to do with, two people commit a crime, one person get caught, and he gets sour at the other person who did not get caught. And because they are sour, they tell on the other person that got away. Now that, in my opinion, is snitching. Right, but back to the subject at hand. They are hypocrites with regard to speaking against this whole snitching thing, right? Because law enforcement have this thing that they call, I think it's like, the blue line of silence. Right, it's one of those situations where, let's say you have two cops trying to apprehend a suspect. Right, and one person, he's basically using the necessary force to subdue that person, and that's all. The other person, on the other hand, he's going above and beyond the necessary force to subdue the subject. He's, hitting them with punches, chokeholds, all of that. But in most cases, that cop will not say anything against his partner. Right? Because in other words, even though he may know that it is principally wrong, survivability kicks in and prevents that person from saying anything. Right? Because at the end of the day, he still has to work with not only that person, but also with his other peers. And he also knows that if he so-called do the right thing and go in and tell on his partner, that most of his peers will reject him. Right? Attorneys do it too. You go into some of these courts, you have prosecutors and defense attorneys. They know they're padding cases and, manipulating evidence, because, prosecutors, they need to get their stats up, right? So they can get voted in again during the next election. So they do a lot of things to help keep that conviction rate up, right? And other attorneys know that, right? And even though it may be principally wrong, they don't say anything. You want to know why? Because survivability kicks in, and they're thinking about their careers. They're thinking like, well, man, this person may be a judge one day. This person may help me out in my career. I know it's wrong, but I just simply cannot say anything because I have to think about my career, not only here, but also in the future. And I wouldn't want any of my actions to bite me in the backside. Right? So that's two examples of where principles versus survivability kicks in. Right? Alright, so let's go ahead and bring it on to Dark Souls. Now, somebody may say, come on there, dude. Now, what in the world does this have anything to do with Dark Souls PvP? Well, let's get into it. As you guys can see, the armor that I am using is pretty weak. As a matter of fact, I think even with 99 humanity, it gives me somewhere around 275 defense. Right? I'm not using a family mask. I'm not using, Darkwood Grain Ring. I'm not even using Giant or Black Armor or none of those heavy armors. Because principally, number one, I hate family masks. With regard to the heavy armors, I do not think that the heavy armors should be paired with the flip, for high mobility. But one thing that I notice, right, when I see a lot of these guys in PvP, they will be, full giants, mother's masks, dark green ring, and the whole nine. And in some of the cases where some of these guys may beat me, I say to myself, this guy sucked. How did he beat me? And a lot of the times when I'm really sitting back and paying attention, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? This guy is not playing with any principles. This guy is basically playing for survivability. Case in point, this particular character right here. I'm only playing with 1500 vitality, right? 1500. And not only do I only have 1500, right? But I also have a very weak armor set. So some of these attacks that, may cause minimum damage to maybe somebody in Havels or Giants or something like that is basically draining my HP. So with regard to this particular character, I'm not really thinking about survivability. I'm playing with regard to principle. Now, what difference does it make, right? The reason why I'm bringing this up is because, a lot of times you hear these guys in their conversations, they talk about their likes and dislikes. And I think the root cause of all of this debate is basically the tug of war, you might say, between these two principles that we're talking about. Survivability and principles. Right? So let's give a Dark Souls example. For example, you'll hear some of the honor dudes who will say something like, hey dude, you should never chain backstab. That's just against principles. We just shouldn't do that. It's just not the right thing to do. Right? Now that's a principle, and I'm good with that. But like all things in life, in my personal opinion, nothing is constant. Maybe mathematics, but other than that, most things in life are conditional, right? A lot of these guys, they talk as if they're absolutists. But I don't believe in absolutism, because there's not too many things that are absolute right, absolute left, black or white. Nothing is like that, So, case in point with the chain backstabs, in one instance, a person may say, chain backstabbing is horrible. You should never do it. I don't care what the situation is. But in a video that I uploaded, it demonstrated how difficult it can be for one person in a 3v1 situation to deal with a person who continues to chug and chug and chug. So based upon that situation, in my personal opinion, chain backstabbing was legitimate. In other situations, like maybe a 1v1 where the person is not flasking, no, I would never do it. But this really calls into question the everyday tug of war of deciding which is more important at the time that we're judging it, principles or survivability. Because, sometimes I look at these guys and they may have mother's masks. And, whenever I land a hit, in most cases, I'm doing the math. I'm kind of counting in my head. Like, okay, that attack was 600 damage. Right? And I'm also paying attention to the vitality bar. And I'm thinking to myself, like, holy crap, this guy has got to have about, 2,000 or 2,200 vitality. Whereas me, with regard to this particular character, I only have 1,500. So am I really playing for survivability? No. Right? Because I'm not wearing any family masks, which would probably boost my vitality. I'm not playing any heavy armor. Right? So basically when I get hit, I'm screwed. Right? Because I have my own beliefs. But in some cases, holding true to certain beliefs all the time could sometimes hold you back. Now, this is not an argument for using, family masks or hornet rings or full Havels. This is not. I'm just kind of, talking about not only with regard to Dark Souls PvP, but the constant tug of war struggle between principles and survivability. Right? Alright, so enough about that little rant. As you guys can see, we're in the Berg. And you know what? Now that I have fought a few guys with those buffs, I really hate buffs. Right? And this is why. Let me kind of explain something. You know, let's say you're fighting against a guy with a buff. Right? And most people who will tell you, you know, they'll tell you something like, hey dude, I mean, when you're fighting against a buff, all you have to do is dodge them, you know, for 60 seconds. You know, I mean, okay, case in point. Now, I don't really remember this match, but let's just kind of pay attention to how it goes. Now, this guy has a buff, right? And even with me blocking, and actually, I kind of got ticked off with the buffs because I know this guy. And I absolutely hate fighting against buffs because at the end of the day, you have to dodge for 60 seconds and hope you don't get hit. And not only that, with me having only 1500 HP, I already know. You know, I'm going to be screwed. Now, some of you may say, hey dude, we saw you fight against a buff and you weren't scared. Well, guess what? I know Godly, and Godly is a good player. So am I going to sit here and take Godly for granted with a buff? No, I'm not. And actually, you know, trying not to fight him with a buff is giving him credit for being a good player. Right? But, you know, back to what I was saying about the buffs. The reason why I do not like buffs, right? Because I've even had some guy say to me, oh, you're wrong for attacking, you know, a guy who's trying to buff. Listen, dude, I will attack you all day long. Right? Because at the end of the day, that person with the buff, number one, no one should be dependent upon a buff. Right? The buffs should supplement your skills, not determine your skills. In other words, if you need a buff to win, then I will question your ability to play. Now, if you just use it, you know, as an added benefit, that's cool. But this is why I don't care about attacking a guy with a buff, because in other words, you shouldn't have to depend on a buff. It should be, you know, something to supplement the skills that you already have. Okay, but back to the subject. With regard to the buffs, you have to go a full minute trying to dodge. And based upon the person that you're playing against, you know, if they're kind of good with the dead angle attacks, they're going to be eating through your shield for a full minute while you're sitting there with the shield up and, you know, probably jumping around trying to dodge the attacks. And Lord knows you better hope they don't have the wrath of the gods, right? Because not only will they be hitting you, you know, with attacks that'll be eating through your shield, but they'll also be hitting you with the wrath of gods. And by the time that minute is finally over, you're pretty much screwed. There's nothing that you can do, right? You better hope that you have enough vitality to at least try to get some licks in, right? So the thing is, whenever I play buff users, whenever it's somebody that I know, you know, and not only that I know is a good player, I usually turtle. You know what I'm saying? Because there's nothing that I can do, you know, especially with my builds with low vitality. Because why would I try to trade blow for blow with a good player? That's suicide in my personal opinion. Right? I mean, because think about it. Even if we were evenly matched, right? And I'll even bring this into the conversation of the Mother's Mask or some of these vitality builds. Even if we were evenly matched, just going blow for blow, I'm going to die every time, guys. Right? So why would I take the chance of doing something like that? And this is why I hate buffs. Because in most cases, unless you're playing with, you know, someone who is a sloppy player or someone who's overconfident in the buffs, they just make a whole bunch of mistakes, you are pretty much screwed. Right? So this is one of the situations where you're facing it again. Survivability versus principle. Because one thing about me, in PvP matches, I never buff. I mean, you guys almost never see me buff. Now, I may have some videos with me buffing, but generally speaking, right, for some of you guys who have been with me from the beginning, you know, and you've seen my past videos, you would know that the brigade almost never buffs. Never, almost never, because, I don't know, they're not necessary in my personal opinion. And with regard to the people who do buff, I see that as a move of survivability. Because in other words, they may say to themselves, okay, well, I have skills, but at the end of the day, I want to win. Right? And somebody who's faced against a Dark Moon Blade or a similar buff, I mean, they're basically going to panic because I'm going to chop at the bit. I mean, I'm going straight to them. Right? So are they playing for any type of, principle of, in a 1v1? I mean, who needs that? They're not playing for that. They're playing for survivability. And it's fair. Right? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's 100% fair because that's the build that they have. Right? But I'm just saying, some of these guys who, and a lot of them are these honor dudes. And I'm not really picking on the honor dudes. I'm just speaking in general. A lot of these guys who have these principles, you guys have to understand that, whether you are a Demon Souls vet or you just have your own individual beliefs, although there are a lot of things that you may not like, you have to understand, and I'm not just even saying you, I'm including myself, because a lot of times I have to remind myself of some of the things that I'm talking about. You have to remember that a lot of these guys are playing simply to survive. Right? They don't have none of these ideas in mind about, well, back in Dark Souls, this is what we did, and this is the honorable thing to do, and this is legitimate, and this. Nobody's playing like that. Some people simply want to survive. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right? Because even the first rule of nature is self-preservation. Right? So, when you guys are kind of playing the game and you're getting ticked off, just kind of think about this conversation about principles over survivability. Well, I actually can't even say over survivability, because I really think that is a constant battle, not only in the game, but also in life. Also in life, because a lot of times, especially if you listen to conservative radio, they'll have you believe that it's all about the principles, because the principles, are the glue that holds us all together. That's how they talk. But in reality, nothing is that straightforward, right? Nothing is left and right, and nothing is black or white. Things are conditional, right? And I think this is a more realistic way to look at life, especially some of you guys who are in college, right? Because one thing about college, they really, especially if you're in one of those social sciences, they try to talk like life is like this utopian thing, and, you can just kind of put your good ideas together and everything will be fine. But that is not life, dude. Right? And some of you guys will kind of realize that as you kind of live life a little bit. All right? Well, all right, guys. I think I did a lot of ranting this particular time, so I hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. I'm not really going to commentate this last match, but as I said before, I hope you guys enjoyed the commentary. Catch you guys next time. Martyrs Brigade is out.